Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you. Well, with all the dignitaries here, I'm not sure that they would agree with me when I say that Father Hesburgh was a layman's kind of priest. I admired him during the civil rights years when I was a Baptist Sunday school teacher and a farmer and later a governor. And when I became a presidential candidate, he was one of the first persons I called. And I asked him to help me. And very quickly he said, I do not endorse presidential candidates. And I said, that's not why I called. I'm in trouble with the Roman Catholics. And Father Ted said, I know it. And he proceeded to say, you brought it on yourself. And then, as a professor would do, he began to explain to me the procedure in the U.S. Constitution for a constitutional amendment. He explained you have to get 2/3 of a vote in the House and Senate. You have to get 3/4 of the votes from all the legislatures in the country. And he said, I don't remember a president's name being mentioned in that particular part of the Constitution. And my advice to you is to stay out of it as long as you're a candidate. And I took his advice. Well, that was my first experience with Ted. But the conversation wasn't over. He then said, I just came from Panama, and I have a message to you from General Omar Torrijos. And he wanted me to remind you that the Christian thing to do as a president is to support a new treaty for Panama. And eventually that resulted. And I have to say, I never did blame Father Ted when it became a very unpopular thing to do, because there were 20 senators who voted for the Panama Canal treaties in 1978, 20 of them. They had to run for office again that year. Only 7 of them came back to the Senate. And the attrition rate was almost as bad in 1980, but I never blamed Father Ted for that, which I could have done. He also called me later on and said he advised me to appoint Cyrus Vance as a Secretary of State, which I did. I took his advice usually. And once when I asked him, how can you advise anybody to be a leader of a great nation, he said, be human. I took that advice as well. We remained friends from then on. And he invited me to give, as has just been mentioned, the commencement address here at Notre Dame in May 1977 on human rights. And I commented then in my speech, and I quote, Father Ted Hesburgh has been the most consistent and effective spokesman for the rights of human beings that I have ever known. I nominated Father Ted as ambassador to lead the U.S. delegation to the United Nations Conference on how science and technology could be used to improve human life. And then later, I put him on the commission to create a Holocaust museum in Washington. As you can well imagine, he was one of the few Roman Catholics on the commission. There were no Baptists, by the way. And then finally, as Alan Simpson has already mentioned, I made him chairman of the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy. And they made the recommendation just shortly after I left the White House. In October 2003, I was honored to join Father Hesburgh in California, as we both, just the two of us, gave eulogies for Joan Kroc, who was so generous to Notre Dame and to the Carter Center and to many other causes. Well, Father Ted was in the Oval Office, and I remember it in February of 1979. And he had done so much for me and for the country, many times taking on responsibilities he didn't much want to do. And I said in a weak moment, if I can ever do anything for you, let me know. And he said, well, I noticed that yesterday you came back from a trip with Admiral Hyman Rickover on an atomic submarine on which you used to serve, and you have a great interest in the ocean, and I have a great interest in airplanes. I didn't know what was coming. And he said, I've always wanted to ride on one of the fastest airplanes in the world. And he began to teach me, again, as though I didn't know, that there was a plane called the SR-71, always painted black. In fact, it was called a Blackbird. And he said, I would like to ride on a Blackbird. And I said, Father Hesburgh, it's not customary for civilians to ride on a top-secret airplane. He said, that's all right. He said, I thought you were Commander-in-Chief. So I called the Secretary of Defense, Harold Brown, and told him I had one of my few requests to him. And then I sent word to the pilot of a SR-71 that he would be having his first civilian passenger, who was a special friend of mine, and I asked him how fast the Blackbird had ever flown. He said 2,193 miles an hour. It was the fastest plane on earth. And I said, I would be very pleased if you could go a little faster than that when you take up for this. And on the last day of February, 1979, Father Ted went up in an SR-71 Blackbird airplane, and he and the pilot went 2,200 miles an hour, which set a new world's record for the fastest any human beings had ever flown, except the astronauts in a rocket. Well, we all know Father Hesburgh has an almost indescribable list of achievements in education and human rights and service to others. But in his autobiography, he gives me credit for arranging this fast ride. And he says that was one of the greatest achievements that he remembers. Well, I'm proud that I was able to do that for him, because he did so much for people everywhere. And the world will really miss this wonderful man.